Well, obviously, with a lot of the third-party solutions coming out right now, you obviously start with the pilot, right?
At the end of the day, pilots lie. Not on purpose, but they lie, right? Because the pilot unit is the best case version of the hospital. Day shift, most engaged charge nurses, diverses that got hand checked that morning, vendor support and IT hovering all around because it's a pilot. So of course it works. Everybody's watching, it works, it's all wonderful.
Ron and Angus, because you guys deal a lot with enterprise-wide deployments. Where do you see some of the big challenges now as we get AI more involved in some of these projects?
I think, first of all, we've got to be careful. We're going to send too much stimuli to caregivers. We have to be careful that we don't turn on the spigot all the way. And number two is, you need to make sure that you're not sending out bad alerts or missing information, because it's just as bad to send a bad alert as it is to miss a good alert. Because once you do that and staff stop trusting something, you really lose that adoption momentum.
That's a really good point. In the last 6 months is the first time I'm starting to hear from a lot of clinical leaders the concept of cognitive overreach, that they're being overburdened with, the clinicians are being overburdened with all the information that they're receiving.
Welcome to Beyond the Blueprint, a podcast designed to empower healthcare professionals, enabling them to improve care delivery through integrated design and technology innovation. My name is Gregg Malkary. I'm the managing director at Lighthouse Health Tech Advisors. Whether you're redesigning a hospital, launching a new digital initiative, or just curious about the future of healthcare, then you're in the right place. Let's explore together what's possible when we go beyond the blueprint. Now, before we dive into today's discussion, I want to recognize our valued sponsors who've made Beyond the Blueprint possible, Simplify Medical. With their support, we're able to bring you insightful conversations around healthcare design and innovation. If you enjoyed today's show, I encourage you to subscribe so you never miss a future episode. Welcome to Beyond the Blueprint. My name is Gregg Malkary from Lighthouse Health Tech Advisors. And today we're talking about what it means to move beyond the EHR and how hospital work gets done in the era of artificial intelligence. Hospitals can already see when consults are delayed, beds are ready or not ready, patients are waiting for transport, or discharges are falling behind. AI is now helping spot these problems earlier, but finding the delay is not the same as actually getting the work done. The real question is, what happens after AI spots the problem? Who owns the next steps? And what happens if no one acts in time? Now, to help us unpack this, I have three industry mavens who I've known for a long time. So don't disappoint me, guys. We have Angus Douglas from GE Healthcare, who's going to focus on whether hospitals can trust data, alerts, and AI signals before staff can act on them. We have Remy, the CEO of Mobile Heartbeat, who's going to focus on how work gets to the right person and who owns the next step. And then finally, we have Chris Talbot, who's part of the Strategic Mobility Group, also known as SMG3 Partners, who's going to focus on whether workflow can survive when units are short-staffed, busy, and handling the same task in different ways. So with that, why don't we get into this? And Chris, I'm going to direct this first question to you. Okay. When Epic shows that a patient's ready for discharge, but the patient still hasn't left, what usually breaks next in the discharge workflow process? So I picked one of the most complicated workflows.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. So what I've seen is what fails next is the handoff. So in the system, Epic marks the patient ready. Now somebody has to tell transport, somebody has to tell EVS to turn that room, and you have an entire stack of clinical assignments that need to be updated. And I've seen that's where it stalls, in that gap between the order and the person who has to act on it. Because documentation isn't motion. That's not actually, initiating anything. The chart says discharge is ordered. It doesn't say whether the person who needs to move next gets a clean signal on a device they could actually trust. That's the break. The workflow on paper assumes a working endpoint at every step. The floor doesn't guarantee one. So you've got this quiet failure mode where everything looks coordinated in the system and nothing's actually moving because the handoff went to a device that was dead or misconfigured or sitting on a charging rack 2 floors away. And here's what makes it worse, I think. Nobody owns that layer. IT is going to own the network. Clinical is going to own the workflows, and the EHR team is going to own that overall Epic experience. But the device in hand, whether it works, whether it's the same across all the floors, whether it survived the last OS update, that falls in the gap. So when a discharge stalls, everyone looks at their piece, and their piece looks absolutely perfect. The problem is the layer underneath that nobody's watching.
Wow, that's awesome. Now, just out of curiosity, is a lot of this based on experience and familiarity with your team members? Is this written down anywhere where these gaps lie, or is Epic providing the glue between the different tasks cross functionally?
In my view, Greg, this is not well documented. This is something that's absolutely from, experience and being in the environment, seeing how
Yeah,
things are starting to functionalize after
yeah,
an Epic go live, and then
yeah.
really starting to, some of these gaps and pain points that are immediately apparent.
Wow, awesome, Chris. Hey, Ron, when a discharge stalls because the next team was never told to act, how often do leaders blame the staff instead of the workflow?
Well, let's break down what the next step is, and that you mentioned is okay. I need to tell somebody, and the communication technology can actually do that effectively. It can tell somebody, and it can even give you a message sent um, indication. So that gives you the false comfort that your message of the next step in the discharge process has been sent. One of the problems, and this isn't the only one, but one of the real prevalent problems is, oh, I just sent a message that I believe is really important to get this discharge moving forward. But my message is one of 100 signals that the recipient receives. So how does someone sort out which one of those is the most important? And how do you sort out which one do I need to take action on right now? So the technology is doing its job the best that it knows how to do, but it doesn't do it completely. It doesn't actually rank or force rank or give you any indication that my message, because it's stalling a discharge, should be more important than a message from somebody asking me if you want to go to lunch or not. It's all in the same bucket.
That's an excellent point. So, how are leading edge hospitals solving that problem today, or maybe they're not?
Well, what they're looking at, and this is where the AI world starts to intrude here, is they're looking at being able to put an intent around each of the messages that comes in. And this can be text messages, it can be a phone call, it can be an alert or alarm. The large language model listens in on all those communications and adds an intent word or an intent, some type of intent, so that you can very quickly, by looking at the screen, figure out what you need to act on next. And the cool thing is that setup to start of what they think, the designer of this, what they think the most important messages are, but it should learn over time what you believe and how your work requires the messages to be ranked. So your most important messages come to the top of the queue, and the ones that can wait later, certainly lunch messages after 2 p.m., they may want to be up in the queue a little bit, but it's going to change how you view we'll call it your inbox. How do you take advantage of the inbox?
From folks you've talked to out in industry might be using this, is it creating, is it improving their ability to be able to operate in high intensity environments, or is it creating increased cognitive dissonance?
Well, so no one is actually using it. And a couple of really cutting edge firms, healthcare systems, have designed the process. And their big problem is, you referenced Epic in the beginning of this podcast, is getting access to the message stream from Epic and being
Got it.
able to work on that message stream. Not possible.
Hey, Angus, when AI says a discharge is delayed, what evidence should leaders require before they let that signal change the patient's workflow?
Well, AI is certainly synthesizing information, but it's also not necessarily exercising judgment, or, it can certainly make recommendations. But if AI is saying it's time to discharge somebody, there needs to be some kind of rationale. I'll give you an example with telemetry. So in telemetry, we're not really using AI to diagnose in real time the ECG signal, as an example. But retrospectively, I want to look at that maybe and make some inferences, and AI can certainly help with that. The other part of it is that AI may be acting on information coming through the EHR that is delayed itself too. Before you let the signal change the patient's workflow, you have to maybe see what that is. AI may say, hey, there's been no alarms, but yet I see some concerning rhythms. So I need to see the underlying data that's going to drive that discharge from telemetry. And the same thing with moving them in and out of our unit. It is piecing together information, but someone still needs to exercise clinical judgment around that. And then there are other factors about discharge too, in terms of family situations, education, and other support structures that may or may not have been considered by the AI. So you need to really make sure the AI is carrying the big picture and know what's behind that. So why did AI say that?
Hey, that's a great thought. So we really need to have human in the loop. You can't just leave everything to AI, but you need to show clinical judgment on whether the suggestion makes sense, or there could be other underlying factors which could influence the direction of the workflow.
Correct.
Wow. Angus, I'm gonna push another one back on you. Once AI finds the delay, what information must it understand before leaders can trust it to recommend the right next steps? Like, what are you finding out in the field right now? Are we trusting AI, or are we just getting our feet wet and experimenting? And the jury's still out, and it could be for very specific workflows that we do provide trust where it can then be totally automated.
Again, it gets down to clinical judgment of what AI is telling you. You still have to have a human oversight, whether it's admitting or discharging. And we see AI now being used to help properly stratify admits in the ED and having the appropriate emergency severity index. And the same thing with discharge, as I mentioned, that AI can certainly look at patterns of information. And does that pattern meet certain criteria for discharge? And so when AI feeds us anything, I think I need to make sure that I understand why it fed me that and what's the underlying clinical data so I can confirm that as a clinician. I don't think they're flipping a switch at all yet, but they certainly I think they're trying to, right now AI is, I think, feeding around the edges to improve our decision process, improve our speed, improve our insights to data.
Yeah.
But it's certainly not making decisions, and it's certainly not big bang yet, forcing you to do what AI is telling you. And I'm not sure it'll ever get to that point, but it's certainly, we can use it a lot more than we are today. I don't know, Ron and Chris, are you seeing something similar?
One of the most interesting parts of what we're seeing in the industry, and it goes back to, 1980s, 1990s, computer industry of open architecture and open systems is, I think it was in the fall of 24, Anthropic put out a specification called the Model Context Protocol, MCP. And basically, MCP, you can think about it, MCP is to AI data sets as HTTP is to the web. It's a language for data sets to be recognizable and be usable by AI tools that use large language models. So I'll give you an example of that. Is you got something in your hospital that creates a ton of data. Let's say creates a large amount of alarm data. And you can have your developers write a dashboard that gives you a daily summary of how are you responding to alarm data. And that dashboard is static. It's to change what's in it, you got to go to your software developer and get them to change the dashboard. If you start looking at what you can do with Model Context Protocol, if you can add that on top of the system that creates the alarm data repository, it creates all the alarm data, then you can use MCP to go in and ask questions of that data set and combine it with other data sets to get an answer. You know how an AI query can merge data sets together really, really easily? So I'll give you an example of, can you please tell me what my response time is on these types of alerts as when it cross-references to the busyness in the emergency department? That may be a relevant answer to you. Or can you tell me what my response time is on my alert capabilities versus the weather in the community? That may be relative to you. So this is how you really take advantage of it. It's kind of using the engine, the tool and the AI engine to look at different data sets and put the information together. And it's all about the protocol that makes that happen, so that you don't need a developer to do the work.
Is MCP, is that that concept, is that being deployed with Epic or some of these third-party tools, which are providing a better framework for conducting the change management? It seems to me that if I'm an informatics group, I need those kind of tools.
Sure.
I might not be ready for them.
Well, the leading edge facilities are starting to realize that having this capability of, hey, it's my data, I want it to be as freely utilized as possible, and they're starting to ask their vendors that create their data sets to add this capability into the tool that created the data. Where they're going to run into a real issue, and this is going to make for a very interesting industry battle, is that sharing of data, or that opening up your system of data, is anathema to Epic. The last thing they want to do is to let their data be used by the hospital themselves to gain insight outside of Epic. So, stay tuned. This will be the battle as to whether Epic opens up their architecture or whether it's going to be closed as it is today. And we're just beginning to see the challenge of getting access to Epic data in a free and easy to use format.
Who owns the data, Ron?
The hospital does, but that doesn't mean they have access to it easily.
Right.
It's funny you should say that. I think organizations like UCSF, I heard, are actually taking the entire Epic database and downloading it into a data mine. Now, Angus, you're more of an expert on this. Does that sound plausible? I think I spoke to Databricks at HIMSS this year. I mean, that would be quite compelling, and you could do some really phenomenal analysis, I would think.
Yeah, it all depends. I think does that affect the immediacy of the data? Because a lot of data in the EHR is already delayed in terms of getting in there. In fact, we often see a lot of these virtual centers now trying to rely on more live data feeding decisions. But certainly the stream of data that Ron's talking about, if you can upload it into a third-party system fast enough, it makes a lot of difference.
So it sounds to me that we really can't enter this realm of AI or AI to support these more advanced clinical workflows unless we have a real data governance strategy and the openness of each of the vendors to be able to provide data that is accessible. And I know Epic has a strategy for AI, but I'm not sure how robust it actually is in reality.
I mean, that's a good question, and I think having somebody from Epic on your next podcast there'd be some interesting questions that you could ask of, hey, Epic, you're committed to using AI, but it's all for internal use inside your product. What about sharing the information that your product generates with others? You can't possibly be everything to all people. So how are you planning on letting the data that you create be easily accessed and be easily utilized by the owner of the data, the hospital? See what they say.
Well, as a matter of fact, we had a whole session on data governance. We had a bunch of 3 CMIOs, and it was a very lively discussion. That a lot of folks are enamored with AI, but you really can't do AI unless you have data governance, and you can't get anybody to agree on what the rules of the data should be. As far as these experts had indicated. Hey, Chris, let me direct this back to you. Which part of existing workflows should leaders redesign before AI is added to it? Are groups looking at this in a very methodical manner on, hey, we're trying to achieve X, right? And there are clinical workflow aspects, there are data governance, and then there's use of AI. Do they have teams that are looking at this in a logical manner, to improve overall throughput?
It's a good question, Greg. There are, in some industries, in some of the facilities we've been in, there are teams dedicated to really taking a look on how to reinforce that overall platform structure and then innovate upon it, right? So a lot of those teams are really taking a look to redesign that overall handoff and the endpoint before they even touch AI. And here's why. They know AI is going to identify, these next tasks and alert faster and more often, right? But if the handoff underneath is broken, all AI is going to be able to enable is find more of that broken handoff sooner. So a lot of teams right now are looking to, fix the parts that are going to be supporting the AI, platform going forward, especially as clinical teams are going to be relying on their mobility devices. So, who owns the next step, how it gets to them, and whether it lands on a device that can actually act is actually really paramount. And we do have some of the, the more advanced facilities that have touched their, the AI wagon, have started to dip their toe, quickly realize, the last part is the one everybody skips. The test isn't whether, the alert reached a screen. It's whether a person who needs to act has a working device on them right now. I've certainly been in plenty of facilities where, they add a smarter notification layer on top of a device fleet where 15 to 20% of the devices are dead, missing, misconfigured on any given day. And that's not a task management problem. That's execution layer problem underneath all of that.
Yeah, this is a really good point. I wonder, are the informatics groups and IT leadership, do they have roadmaps on how they'd like to actually approach the use of AI? What are you guys seeing in some of the deployments that you guys are involved with? Is there a logical manner, or is it kind of wait and see? We want to get past the hype.
I mean, what I see and hear out there is it's not quite wait and see, because they're really struggling with the governance of responsible AI use first. That is that's the first hurdle that they've got to get over. Is someone in the facility is deemed the AI czar, and the responsible use has to be cleared before they can move on to the next step. So, I'd say healthcare is lagging behind other industries for good reason, to make sure that it's being used responsibly and ethically and carefully.
Question: what are you
Yeah.
finding in some of the leaders that you're working with? Where do they see AI right now, and what is their overall strategy and how they're approaching it? It sounds like it's a very methodical approach around safety and clinical efficiency and other key
Well,
key items.
so being in a medical device company, I mean, a lot of the initial work has been done around, imaging AI and how do I help, a radiologist, diagnose something and not miss something. So it's been a diagnostic aid really, and just, leveraging more intelligence and faster systems. But at the same time, looking at other systems, that's why I mentioned earlier, we're not really using it for kind of real time monitoring of patients necessarily, in terms of at the looking at an ECG and saying what's happening, because AI doesn't really say how it got there and how it arrived at that conclusion, which really may be an FDA issue that
Yeah.
before I diagnose or respond to something. So, so that's really important. Although, and we hear, hey, AI can read a rhythm better than some physicians, but at the same time, some of the algorithms out there have already been built with machine learning. So we find ourselves, we're actually using it to improve the algorithms we built today to inform what's there. But as far as using it, in the real time, I don't think it's quite there. So we're seeing it more used in, the imaging world, seeing it more used in the operational world, appropriately admitting patients, appropriately discharging patients. How do I identify a patient that, I could move off a telemetry floor or down to a lower level of med surg or even out of the hospital? So I think we see it. That really seems to be where a lot of people are looking at it, and also around what Ron talked about, which is that ability to on demand synthesize data to answer the question you're trying to address.
Greg, think about every AI project for a hospital falls into one of two camps. There's the clinical use of AI, which is designed to make outcomes better. And then there's the operational use of AI to make the hospital run more efficiently and more effectively. The operational projects are an order of magnitude easier to deploy, and the results are much easier. The hurdles, the barriers of entry to an operational use case is much lower. So I think if you look at the money spent and the number of projects that are live, they're all going to be really, the majority are going to be focused on the AI side. If you can get a clinical use case through the system, FDA approved, that's where your big payback is, but it's a lot of work.
Hold on, Bell. Let's pull that thread. So, what are the use cases that are seeing the early traction in industry right now?
What I'll call the cost guardrails is these solutions start to get deployed, and then the CFO gets the first quarter bill for the AI use, and all of a sudden you're going in a value engineering exercise to, instead of all AI all the time, of, geez, how few tokens can this thing actually use to solve the problem? And it's a moving target because the models change, almost on a daily basis. The pricing changes almost on a daily basis. So anybody that's doing, FinOps around the AI cool use case that should be saving the hospital a fortune is suddenly scrambling to get the cost under control.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been talking to a lot of folks lately about the tokenization of AI, but I haven't heard anybody talk about it specifically in healthcare. But you're right, this is a big issue, especially where your gross margins are so thin.
Yeah.
And is this a topic when you guys talk to CIOs or other leaders at hospitals? Are they talking about the cost of deploying AI?
Well, it only began to become an issue this past quarter, because that's when the bills started to show up for real uses, and that's when the LLM companies realized that at some point in time they have to make a profit instead of investing billions of dollars into their data centers. So suddenly the pricing changed, and the bills showed up, and all of a sudden it went from never discussed to that's the only topic to be discussed.
Right. Well, obviously, with a lot of the third-party solutions coming out right now, you obviously start with the pilot, right? And as we deploy pilots, is one thing to have a pilot within a specific department, but when you go enterprise-wide, everything changes. Chris, you've been involved with different pilots of different types of projects, at your days at ASCOM and at SpectraLink. What are the mechanisms that need to be in place for leaders who are looking to deploy these solutions that they eventually want to deploy hospital-wide or even health system-wide?
That's a great question. So, as you well know, I love, POVs, proof of value, go for the pilot. But at the end of the day, pilots lie. Not on purpose, but they lie, right? Because the pilot unit is the best case version of the hospital. Day shift, most engaged charge nurses, diverses that got hand checked that morning, vendor support and IT hovering all around because it's a pilot. So of course it works. Everybody's watching. It works. It's all wonderful. But, if you strip some of that out when it's 3 a.m. on a med surge floor and the nurse is afloat who's never seen that workflow, and half the devices came off a charging rack, nobody's audited, and there's no IT and no vendor in the building, that's the real test. Not does it work with support standing next to it, but does it work when all the support is gone? And what breaks first is almost never the software. It's that consistency underneath. Some of those things that we've been discussing. One pilot unit, every device was the same build, same apps, same OS. Run it house-wide, though, and now you've got 4 OS versions, 3 configurations, devices somebody side-loaded with something their grandmother showed them, and a float nurse getting a different experience on every floor she covers. The workflow didn't fail. The standardization underneath it failed, and the workflow just inherited that inherent confusion. So I think where leaders have to prove is that the base layer holds without the babysitting. Not that it worked once with ever extra staff and vendor support popping up, but it's enforced, identical, every device, every unit, every shift, after all that help walks away. So it's consistent, repeatable, and managed. The pilot proves the idea, but standardization is what proves it survives and is actually utilized and uplifted in the facility.
Ron and Angus, because you guys deal a lot with enterprise-wide deployments, where do you see some of the big challenges now as we get AI more involved in some of these projects? How might you have to be better prepared to assist the organizations to be successful? Is it going to be any more complicated than what we've done in the past?
I think, first of all, we've got to be careful. I mean, we started automating alerts. Once we start automating AI, are we going to send too much stimuli to caregivers? And are we sending it with enough information that they can see that it's real? And it may be a clinical alert. It may be a workflow reminder. We have to be careful that we don't turn on the spigot too all the way. And number two is, you need to make sure that you're not sending out, bad alerts or missing information, because, when we get into the deploying these large enterprise-wide central monitoring operations, sadly, it's just as bad to send a bad alert as it is to miss a good alert. Because once you do that and staff stop trusting something, you really lose that adoption momentum. So you have to make sure it's good data. You have to make sure it's prioritized in the right way, because at any given moment, caregivers are dealing with more than one incoming alert, typically of some form. So it's got to fit in the whole scheme of everything that they're receiving. So you've got to just be really judicious in what you're sending out.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In the last 6 months is the first time I'm starting to hear from a lot of clinical leaders the concept of cognitive overreach, that they're being overburdened the clinicians are being overburdened with all the information that they're receiving. And Angus and I have a joint customer together that is a kind of the poster child of this, where I was on a visit there some time ago and I was just shadowing a nurse. And the nurse got 5 alerts in 30 seconds, 3 of which were toilet alerts. And you actually talk to how this system was set up. You talk to the leaders that set it up, and basically every service line wants all of their alerts to go to everybody all of the time. And there's no one in charge of all of I call it the alarm czar. There's no alarm czar. So it means that every service line has all their information going to everybody. And you can see that the end user just no longer pays attention. They're so overwhelmed. It's basically clinical spam.
Wait, hold on. Wasn't there an alarm committee that is within most organizations, or this is totally different?
Well, they all set up the same rules. But here's the thing, Greg, is that what Ron just talked about is not so much an alarm, that's a patient call. And I can't tell the patient, don't call me into the bathroom. I can't tell the patient, don't ask me for water or ice chips, or I'm in pain, right? So how do we address that? One thing AI might be able to do, and we kind of can do this in telemetry today, but we're not doing it with nurse call, is that nurse already addressing multiple other things? Should I be rerouting that? So maybe it's in the routing of these interruptions that AI can say, hey, Nurse Chris has already got juggling 3 things. I can't send him another. And the other part is at some point leveraging location into the equations here. Who's not only available, but who's in the proximity of that, who's not in an isolation room. So these are things that don't happen today. Maybe AI can help us with that routing.
Yeah, and I think both the gentlemen have nailed on this. We need to get to a place where we're having much more bespoke, customization on a per floor or per treatment area level, with routing not only for messaging and alerts, but all of the other applications that the clinicians are being asked to use, which we know are differing from treatment area to treatment area. So there has to be this complete uplift where we're going to have a much more of a designed infrastructure and base layer of how those messages are being distributed, which information for which tier, which area, which floor, because it has to start to segment, because it is just an overload right now. There needs to be a lot more categorization for some of that information.
As Amy called it, alarm flood conditions. They defined that term more than a decade ago, but it's still a fact today. And like we were saying, you can't really tell a patient not to press a button. So that's where the alarm. Now, sending it to everybody, that's maybe something the alarm committee can address. maybe you need to zone areas and not send it to the entire.
I can see where risk management would love it that to happen, where everybody gets it that way, less likelihood to get sued. But that also means the risk management group can also be lowering the alarms to make sure that nothing is actually falls through the cracks. So what I'm hearing as I'm hearing you guys talk is that perhaps we're headed in the direction where AI will be running the hospital. It's an intelligent operating system, right? That looks at patient flow and throughput, that looks at the entire management of a patient, very much like Star Trek. Now that's very futuristic, but it seems like we're headed in the direction of more overall management to the hospital's mission. I don't know. What do you guys think? Is that what? Because I know with G, you guys have command center, right? I can imagine this wall of analytics that's really looking at the whole operations of the hospital. I'd also imagine
for AI can certainly help us be predictive and plan ahead. So as we're looking at everything from scheduled surgeries to the trajectory of care, I think AI can help better inform that. We've certainly had algorithms in the past. This can definitely improve that and be much more dynamic.
You know, we did an interesting experiment a couple years ago when the models were just be coming out. Is our communication system creates a huge amount of data, and every piece of data of a text message, it has the sender's role, the receiver's role, the time it was sent, and an unstructured payload. It could be operational information. It could be patient information. It could be just conversation and gossip. So we took 6 months of this message store and we fed it into a model just to see what come out of it. And we started to classify, certain topics and certain sentiments. And we're interested in that. We were thinking that we could be able to provide a hospital leader the sentiment of what's going on in their organization in almost real time. So, for instance, if you make a change in the staffing patterns, is that a positive or a negative change from your staff's point of view? It gives you almost real-time feedback on what's happening across your institution from a communication standpoint. What's the sentiment of people? But it also enabled you to figure out what people were communicating about. So I'll ask you guys one question. We'll have a little fun here. We asked the model one question: which department gossips the most? Because we have all the messages, so we knew, categorized the messages into gossip. So which area, functional area of the hospital gossiped the most? What's your guess, Greg?
Which department?
Yes.
Med surge.
Okay. Angus?
I'm thinking OR staff, maybe OR nurses.
Oh,
Chris?
really?
General treatment floors.
All wrong. The IT department.
Yeah. That's funny.
I totally buy that. I don't even know why I was not even thinking IT, but yes, 100%.
Yep.
That's funny.
But I thought it was interesting. I mean, there's a use case where, your data, the insights into what that data holds, and a large language model that's properly configured and properly has access to it can really do some interesting stuff.
I think it's really interesting. How do we apply that to other areas, other applications? I don't see any way around it. These are much more complicated models and applications we're developing. It behooves us not to do that, in a thoughtful manner as you're deploying across 25 hospitals in your system. Hey guys, unfortunately we're out of time. I do have one lightning round. I wanted to give each of you guys 30 seconds. So we have all these informatics leaders that are audience members. What piece of advice would each of you give to informatics leaders across the country on how they should be thinking about today's topic? As they move toward embracing AI and deploying for various usage models within their health systems. Who would like to go first? All right,
I mean, I'll jump in.
Right.
Go ahead, Angus. Angus, we haven't heard from you, Chris. I've been talking too much. You guys go ahead.
All right.
Well, I just think, don't boil the ocean. I think you need to pick something that's very definable and very achievable, and yet important. And so I think it's a great start, but you need to. I think you need to find the quick wins with this to start with, and
Okay,
the
right.
valuable quick wins.
Yeah,
I would
think
say whatever you do from a deployment standpoint of anything of this type of technology, put some time and energy into the change management. Put the money into the change management, because without that, it is going to fail. You're introducing something to a user base that is busy. They are constantly busy, and they've got real responsibilities that this is going to more or less interfere with, unless it's introduced properly as a way for them to spend more time with the patient, more time practicing medicine, and less time with the technology. So change management is the name of the game.
I
All right,
like it.
Chris.
And my advice is to manage AI at the floor level and really start designing around the reality of how care is being delivered. Certainly these AI systems may know that a task exists in one of the system, but it doesn't, always know that a unit is 3 nurses short already at capacity, or dealing with priors that just changed, 2 minutes ago. The change nurse and the people closest to the work need to have the authority to decide what the unit can safely absorb, and AI should support their judgment, not override it or automatically push more work onto an already overloaded team. But I think that clinical authority only works when the foundation underneath is reliable and consistent. The right information has to reach the right person on a working device with a consistent configuration that's, scaled across that entire department, and an accurate view of what's happening in real time. So before hospitals really can scale AI, I think they need to prove that the workflow, handoffs, devices, and support model can survive normal staffing on every unit and every shift. Otherwise, AI will not eliminate the delay. It's simply going to identify the same broken handoffs faster and automate the overload.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank Angus, Ron, and Chris for joining us today. This is Gregg Malkary from Lighthouse Health Tech Advisors. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to having you join us next time. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Blueprint. Together, we're exploring how thoughtful design can simplify complexity, enhance patient care, and create meaningful change. If you found value in today's episode, make sure to subscribe and leave a review in order to help us continue the conversation. Let's reimagine healthcare together on Beyond the Blueprint.